Hello and welcome to the Con Couple. I'm Richard,
I'm Caroline.
and we go to a frankly unhealthy number of cons every year.
I maintain we don't go to enough cons.
Honey, how many of the past several weekends have we been to a con?
I think it's just been the last 2 weekends, honestly.
I think you'll find it's more than that. But regardless, we figured that mostly for our own documentation purposes, so we can actually remember all of the cons we go to, we figured we would actually start recording the conversations we have in the car on the ride home. And if other people want to listen to it, great, have fun.
So if you're thinking about going to a con, this might be a good podcast to listen to.
And if you can't justify it for whatever reason and wonder what you missed, well, here's a good chance to catch you up.
And if you actually were at the con, then you can relive it with us.
Also, if you were at a con with us, we're very sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, this is raw. Just for legal purposes, this is all hands-free. We're using lapel mics. I, the non-driving person, am in charge of all things that involve pushing buttons. And obviously, if there is anything that takes focus or traffic or bloody blue, we will turn off the podcast and deal with that. But we are driving currently between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and both of those states allow for this type of podcast to occur. We are not violating any state laws.
Yep, I have both hands on the driving wheel at the moment, and, the driving wheel? It's called a steering wheel, you idiot. Okay.
Yeah,
Start
in case you
strong.
can't tell, this is also unedited because we don't have time for that stuff.
No, we're too lazy for that stuff.
I don't have time for that stuff.
And I'm too lazy for that stuff, so there we go.
Yeah.
So, which con are we talking about today?
Get your pun ears ready.
Because we were at ConCoction in Cleveland, Ohio.
So this is part of a series of, we think, small sci-fi cons that exist in the Midwest, some of which have pun names like Con on the Cob, others of which seem to be more focused on Star Trek, like Starbase Indy, and there are a couple others that are kind of in this circle that seem to be run by a similar group of people. And we have done events with them before, including Con on the Cob and Starbase Indy.
We also attended Marcon, and there was clearly a lot of crossover between the people who attend Marcon and the ones who attend this one, because we recognized a bunch of people.
R.A.P. Marcon.
R.I.P. Marcon.
Yeah, that con, in case you can't tell, has decided that last year was going to be its last year due to financial difficulties.
Which is sad, because we really like that one.
This con seems to be doing okay, although we are not staying. So for reference, this is Saturday night. This is a 3-day con. For this con, we chose to do Friday and Saturday, but not Sunday. And that was mostly just because there wasn't a lot on the schedule for Sunday. And this was a con we were driving back and forth from. And the drive is about 2 hours. It's 3 hours thanks to our shenanigans tonight. But
yeah, you decided you wanted to go grocery shopping at a chain that is a 3-hour drive from our home. But because it's effectively just an hour past Cleveland, we were closer to it as a result of being at this con, so yeah, kind of worth it.
And then you messed it up by going to the wrong grocery store.
I did in fact take us to the wrong one, but I did not realize there were two of them within 15 minutes of each other.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it works out fine.
So,
also, I feel the need to emphasize, you can probably tell by the podcast time, but this is not going to be 3 hours. We cannot possibly talk about the con for that long, so don't worry on that front.
So, let's start by talking about layout, how it was all set up, all of the kind of, that kind of shenanigans, and then later on we'll talk about what we actually did.
Mm-hmm.
So, this particular one was held at the, what was it called? The something or other Inn?
I think it was Bertram Inn.
Bertram Inn sounds correct.
And technically this was in Aurora, Ohio, which is like a suburb area of Cleveland.
Yeah. So this was the Bertram Inn and Conference Center, and the con was kind of split 50-50 between two different buildings, one of which was the Conference Center, and one of which was the actual hotel itself. So, in terms of the hotel part, they had the vendors hall over there, they had their author area, because this con was very literary focused in terms of, they had a lot of small local authors, and some slightly bigger local authors. I don't actually know how large most of their reader bases are, but that's fair. Just overtaking this truck. They also had representation from the Federation, which again is a local group, local to Ohio, and
which do Star Trek stuff.
Yep. and a few sort of local cosplayers who, again, we've seen at a lot of different cons in Ohio, which, again, fair and valid. There is a pretty good con circuit in Ohio, and cosplayers can quite comfortably make a bit of money, doing appearances at those cons.
Sorry, there's a traffic accident coming up, so he's a bit distracted.
Yep.
But it looks like it's been cleared off the road, so that's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Generally, I don't think I'm a very big fan of the two building split. I get why cons have to do it because, again, space is something you have to pay for, and the type of space you can afford is kind of limited in terms of location, and it does give you more room. Would have been a little bit nicer if it was during the warmer months. Again, we're at random time during March, and we flipped a coin, and this weekend it's a cold weekend in March. Bit of snowing, so going back and forth between buildings wasn't the most fun.
Yeah, a little on the chilly side, especially since your particular costume for today does involve bare shoulders.
Yeah.
No particular fashion reason for that. You're just wearing a corset.
Yeah. So it was pretty cold going back and forth. Also, we might talk about this later. A couple of our disabled friends at the con commented that they back and forth between buildings wasn't really particularly accessible between these two particular buildings.
Yeah.
But it was covered, which was nice. There was a light overhang, so at least if it was raining or snowing, which it was on Friday, you didn't get covered in snow. So that was nice.
That was nice. But yeah, the second building was where they had the majority of the panel rooms. So there were 3 panel rooms, I think. 4.
Yeah. So they had one very bigger panel room that does have it's kind of a pro-con thing, pun intended, we're going to use that a lot, of like stadium seating, which is good insofar as I really like stadium seating where it's like you go up and it's higher up because it makes your view easier. A lot of con rooms have the problem that because all the seating's at the same level, if you're at the back of the room, it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah.
This didn't really have that problem because of that like level to it, but it also wasn't really handicapped accessible because of the tiers on the floor.
Yeah. Which again, advantages and disadvantages, and you could at the very least sit at the back level quite comfortably if you had those accessibility issues.
Yeah, and I do think there was a way to get down to the floor, but I wasn't able to see how it was at that time period. So, and it is nice to have the stadium seating kind of set up there. So that was one con space. There were, I think, 2 rooms that I would probably just describe as like generic panel rooms that, are just basic rooms with chairs set up and like a table at the front with microphones that you could use. Although not a lot of people use microphones this weekend, which was fine for us, I think.
Yeah, again, those spaces, especially given that this con, so we didn't buy our badges in advance for this one. We just turned up on Friday and bought them there. And I was number 252 and you were 251, I think.
Yeah, so we think the number of people probably was around 300 total because I don't think that many people bought after we were done. It was mostly a pre-reg con. I know what you would think.
Hard to say. I'd say probably somewhere in the 300 to 400 range.
Yeah. So smaller by most con standards. And those rooms I thought worked well. There was a little bit of sound bleed, which you're always going to, I think, see at a hotel like this. So you could kind of hear what was going on in the other rooms, but I wasn't too bothered by that.
Yeah, fortunately, this wasn't the kind of con where there was like a loud rave going on in one room while another room was trying to have a poetry reading.
We've had that happen before.
So, the fact that like occasionally we could hear like applause from the room next door wasn't too big of an issue.
So yeah, I thought the space worked relatively well. They did have one fourth kind of smaller room. I've noticed some cons that are at more local hotels tend to do this because keep in mind a lot of hotels are used for other types of like meetings besides like fan conventions. And they'll have like business rooms that are set up for people to, I guess, do businessy things at.
Yeah, this was nominally the presidential boardroom. So, just big oval table in the middle of it with a bunch of chairs around it, which sort of worked for, the more like conversational panels.
Yeah, I do admit that I'm not the biggest. I get why cons use them. I would rather have the extra space than not. We've pretty much every time we've been in those rooms for a con, I think that they tend to get overcrowded quickly. There's not enough space. You can't really do what you want to do in them a lot of the time. We ran up a little bit against that this weekend, but not as much as we have at other cons.
What I will say is we've been to cons before that are board gaming cons, and having one of those rooms for like a dedicated tabletop roleplay game is actually really good. They
Yeah.
are really great rooms for that. But for more like
fan-focused panels or discussions or anything, like, because you can only really have, I think, about 12-ish people in that room comfortably, it outgrows its capacity really, really easily.
yeah, I'm one of those people who, if I notice a maximum occupancy sign, I like to like read it, and I happen to notice the maximum occupancy sign on that one said 20 people.
I think we're pushing that with one of the panels, so yeah.
But again, we'll get onto that when we talk that. In terms of food, they had a hospitality room which had sort of snacks and things, which I don't think we spent any real time in.
Mm-hmm. It did look like people were enjoying it. It's just not an area of the con we really went to because we're, as you can tell, if you decide to like want to listen to this podcast and aren't sick of us by the end of this episode, we're very much panel people when it comes to cons. For any con that has panels, we're going to be spending most of our time at cons in those panels.
Yeah, which is that's the thing that interests us generally, and we'll kind of use the other space. If there's a lull between like things we want to go to, we'll like maybe go to the hospitality room or the board gaming room or whatever to kill an hour. Or wandering the vendors hall is another thing that we tend to do to kill a bit of time between panels.
Yeah, we're not very shop focused at cons like other people are. We'll buy stuff if we think it's cute occasionally, but our big thing there isn't to like buy. It's mostly to go to panels and kind of geek out with people, share our hobbies and interests, stuff like that.
Yeah. But they also did have a pair of food trucks, which I tried one of them on Friday and I tried the other one today on the Saturday.
Yeah, for reference, I have a disability, so I basically can't eat during the day. It's complicated, probably not worth getting into, but I don't need to eat during the day. He does, so this will be his segment to kind of divulge.
Yeah. And the food trucks were pretty good. I can't for the life of me remember what they were both called. One of them was something like, it was something or other smoked meats, and the acronym came to BDSM, which feels like a very deliberate choice on their part.
Yeah, I think they had a pig with a whip on the front of it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what that actually was. That makes sense. But no, that was pretty good.
Don't let him fool you. He's not actually that innocent.
Yeah. But no. And that was the one I had on the Friday. Had some brisket, or a brisket sandwich, and a couple of sides, and yeah, they were good. Very tasty. And then today I had from the other food truck whose name I really can't remember, something like Fair Food, with fair spelled the like fairground way. Real professional job, Richard. Real great start to this podcast. I had
You didn't even tell people your accent was real.
Every time she's got to tell people.
The thing is, if you go to cons enough, people think his accent's fake and he's just doing a bit constantly.
I'm not. This is my actual voice. I was born in the northeast of England.
And now he's here because he's married to me.
Yep. One day we'll tell the story of how that happened. But
no,
anyway,
we're not going to do that.
No, we're not going to do that. But anywho, and yeah, I had a chicken palm sandwich, which was actually really good. Like, they used garlic bread as the bread for that sandwich. That was really good.
Yeah, you were in a panel while you were eating because the break time we had to get food ran up against a panel we wanted to attend, and people were like salivating in that panel because you just had that and a giant thing of cheesy fries.
Yeah, one guy was just like, "Where did you get that?" And I'm like, "The food truck out there." And he's like, "Okay, I think I'm going to have to go there straight after this panel." And I'm like, "Yep, that's a very valid choice."
It looked good. I wanted some, and I can't even eat it. So.
Yeah, it was good. Like, no notes. And again, both food trucks were a little on the pricey side, but again, like,
I mean, you got a lot of food for $20, which I think is a pretty good deal. Like, you're not going to need to eat when we get back tonight.
No, I think I'll be quite fine. Like, I might have a dessert of some sort when we get home, but other than that, I'm good.
And parking was also free, which I do appreciate. Typically, if you're not in a downtown area or something like that, you get free parking, which is great because parking at like more major conventions can add up. It's like almost as much as a con ticket. Mm-hmm. You go all 3 days.
Yep.
And keep in mind, we can't typically stay in con hotels, so we can't really rate those. Again, my disability just makes staying in con hotels difficult.
Yep.
And for this particular con, because it was a 2-hour drive and we were only going for 2 days, we just decided to drive back and forth.
Rather than worry about trying to get an Airbnb or anything like that.
Was, I think, partially that, and partially, and again, I do want to emphasize, as we talk about cons and criticize them, we do want to emphasize that we know everyone's trying their best. Typically with cons, this is all volunteer work. It's done by people who are really passionate about it, who have day jobs and like real life worries, and they can't be expected to do everything perfectly. So when we criticize, we're always doing it with love, and I definitely think that even if we have criticisms, we still had a blast.
Oh yeah, this was a good con. I'm very happy with this one.
But in this particular case, they weren't exactly great about getting a schedule out.
Yeah. So when exactly? So you've got a spreadsheet of like upcoming cons that we are thinking about going to.
Yep.
And quite often we won't definitively decide we want to go to a specific convention until we see the schedule. So we want to know, is this going to be a con with stuff we're going to enjoy at?
Because again, we're panel people, so the primary draw for us is like just panels.
Yeah.
It's not celebrities or the dealer's hall or anything else. It's just what do people have on to like do that day.
Yeah.
In this particular con, they didn't. So I'm still a bit unclear on when they got a schedule actually on their website or if they ever did. Up until Thursday night, the con started Friday, I didn't see anything. I did see eventually on their Facebook page a link to their Discord. I joined their Discord server. Somebody that day was asking if there was a schedule, and around 7 p.m.-ish on Thursday night, they posted a link to the schedule in their Discord server, and that was the first time on any of their pages, and I was checking their website, 2 different Facebook pages, and then Discord, I saw anything resembling a schedule. So
yeah.
I didn't really know what to expect. I honestly didn't even really, because it was a bit unclear, know what type of con this actually was. I knew they were associated with like Marcon and Con on the Cob and Starbase Sunday, which we've been to before. So I thought they would probably lean a little bit more sci-fi, but I really had no idea.
Yeah, which again, it's kind of interesting because again, the name ConCoction doesn't really give you any clues other than like concoction to me implies alcohol. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And to be fair, this was definitely a more adult con, but not on purpose. Insofar as it's the one thing you will notice if you go to a lot of different types of cons,
Which we do,
is that different types of cons have different age brackets. If you're going to an anime con, most of the people you see are going to be somewhere in the
18 to 25 at most.
Yeah, 50. I'd be generous and say 15 to 30.
Yeah.
Then
probably the largest cons we go to are the celebrity-focused cons. So in Ohio, that's Fan Expo and Galaxy Con. They tend to have the most celebrity-focused draws.
Yep.
And tend to be probably 10 to 20,000 people.
Yep.
They are in bigger convention spaces, obviously. And those tend to be mostly 30-somethings who want autographs.
And their kids.
Yep.
Those are very family-focused events. Like they want you there with your kids because they want your kids to see cool stuff in the vendors hall and say, "Mommy, please buy that for me."
Yeah.
Or "Mommy, Daddy, whatever." Yeah.
But and those can still be fun. They're just a different experience. And then board gaming and sci-fi cons tend to skew a bit more Gen X with their teenagers.
Yeah. And again, like we don't really care. You know, we will happily go to everything. We've even done furry cons in the past. And furry cons are their own kind of unique thing. And when we next go to one, we'll talk about furry cons.
That will be in 2 weeks.
Oh, God, really?
Yeah, the one in Michigan.
Okay. So, I forgot that was a fur con.
So do we want to get into this con? Because
yes,
I'm not sure if the demographic of our audience, if we ever have an audience, is going to want to listen to us both dissect ConCoction and Motor City Fur Con. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of crossover, but we'll see.
We'll see. So, this particular con, as I say, we drove down on the Friday.
And we did choose, on some Fridays, we take Fridays off to go to a con. Sometimes we just choose to go after work. With my job, since I'm a college professor, I can choose my own hours, so I'm not even working Fridays this semester, but you still are.
I am.
And this con didn't even have any events earlier on Friday. Some do. This one, I think, just started straight up at 5. So we're just like, well, we'll just go down after work. That's easier.
Yeah, so we went down after work on that one. Actually made pretty good time on the roads. So, you know, we were there by, I think the first panel we went to was at like 6-ish.
Yeah, we got there around 5. Got our badges. Interesting, they did have us do like since we didn't pre-register, we just did it there. But they did have us fill out like an actual physical document, which I thought was interesting.
Yep.
It wasn't a big deal. It was just put your name and what you wanted on your badge and stuff. So
name, address, you know, emergency contact information, all that jazz. Like,
and because it was a smaller con, there was no line. Like we were there, we were the only people in there. We got our badges.
Yep.
very smooth process. I was still definitely setting up a little bit, and I think there were a big confusion over stuff like rooms and stuff like that at the beginning, but they were helping each other out, and like, again, no shade to anyone who works registration, because it's the toughest job at a con.
It really is. And yeah, no, perfectly fine. 55 bucks a ticket for the weekend, I believe.
And then, like with most of these, the prices will vary depending on when you register. So if you register early, it'll be cheaper. We don't tend to register until we have a schedule, and also just because we don't want to like risk buying for a con, because typically most of them are not refundable. So if we can't go, then we're out money. So we generally just buy a little bit later and just don't take the risk.
Unless it's a con that like we know we definitely have been to a few times before and know we really want to go again this year. But even those, we rarely know for certain.
Yeah. So with this, after we, I think, got our badges, and they did have printed badges and lanyards. The con we were at last weekend had badges that you stuck on with, I think,
just a safety pin in the back.
Safety pin, which I wasn't a fan of because I don't like puncturing holes in my clothes. So I like ones that give out free lanyards. So
yeah. So Friday was a pretty light time, relatively speaking. So we started with a author panel, which was a group of 4 different local authors reading excerpts from their books. Each of them was given sort of 15 minutes to read.
There was a little bit of confusion, not the actual con, just the confusion that happened with the rooms at the beginning.
Yeah.
Which we actually had to help out with. So.
Yep, because according to the map that had been handed out and the schedule.
Schedule.
This is not one you're going to win. Like, I have said sweater in the past instead of jumper. I'm going to keep saying schedule properly. This is the kind of debate what you have when you're a British person married to an American, for the record.
Yep. So yeah, the map didn't have the room, I think, correctly labeled, was what we eventually determined.
Yeah, A and B had been, or ballroom A and ballroom B had been swapped around on the map, and the schedule had them also mixed up. So, like, if you looked at the map in terms of where they physically were on the map, everything made sense and lined up.
They just mixed up A and B.
Yeah.
And it's a bit unclear when that happened in the process. We had already toured, because the first thing we do when we get to cons is obviously tour the space to make sure we know where everything is.
Yep.
So we knew that ballroom A was being used for basically Pathfinder to Society, board games, tabletop stuff, which is pretty common at a con.
Yep.
And we knew that room was set up that way. That room was labeled as the room that the author reading was supposed to be in, and obviously couldn't be both, and also
was not set up for that kind of panel. It was set up with like
round tables for board gaming, not like straight seating for that type of event. And there was just an empty room, ballroom B, that was very clearly set up for that type of event.
Which again, that kind of confusion happens occasionally.
Confusion.
You're going to keep doing that.
That actually is a con.
I know.
Further confusion is also a con. I
am aware of that because you told me.
I know, but they don't know that.
Yeah. So once that was kind of sorted out, and everybody figured out what was going on, that panel was perfectly fine. It's always interesting hearing authors read their own work because they're simultaneously very good at it and not good at it, insofar as they know their own work. They know exactly where they want the emphasis to be, but typically they're not trained in that kind of performance.
He is, so he's a little bit persnickety about this.
I'm not formally trained. I've just done it a lot. And if you read aloud things a lot, you start learning tricks. You learn how, you learn certain things that are kind of hard to state. But again, you get with practice.
I mean, reading your own work's a pretty vulnerable thing generally. Because writing's fairly vulnerable. It's probably pretty hard for them to do. And I thought they did a really good job, all things considered.
Yeah, like absolutely no criticism. It was purely a case of you could tell which of them had more experience doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not going to throw shade on any individual or anything like that. It's just that as somebody who has done like amateur voice acting and who used to have a YouTube channel where I literally would read entire visual novels. Like, it's always kind of fascinating to me to see how different people approach it.
Yeah, but I thought all authors did a good job. I think all of their work probably would have like somebody who would want to read it. So again,
Absolutely.
some of this is like fantasy romance that might not be in everyone's genre. Some of it involves like, I don't know, elements of sci-fi that I might not be personally into. But I do encourage you to go to the ConCoction website if you're interested in like supporting local Ohio authors and like look them up and see if any of their work is for you. I'm not going to try to describe it in any detail because the names and the plot lines are probably just going to get confused in my head, so I don't trust us to really represent that.
I would
But
agree.
all of them seem like they were well-written books that I think some person would really, really enjoy.
Absolutely. Like, there is a these are people who are able to make a living as authors.
Yeah. And a couple of them I flagged to buy. I didn't buy any at this con because I didn't have time, but a couple of them I did write down, so I might buy later. But I don't want to privilege those over other ones. So look them up, see if any of them are to your taste.
Exactly. So, you still got your phone, by the way?
Yeah, it's my lap.
Okay, good.
This is so raw and unedited.
It's great. This is, again,
How would I not have my phone?
I don't know, mild paranoia?
Oh my God, somebody's turning this off right now and rolling their eyes.
Obviously. So, the next panel that we did was the 7 o'clock one, which was, what was that?
That was the quiz.
Ah, yes. So that was a quotation quiz, whereby the panelists for that one had basically prepared a series of categories. So, for example, Oh My Sci-Fi, or trying to remember some of the other fun names. I remember Animate My Heart.
No one chose that one. This was very clearly not an anime con, and you could, I think, see that.
Yep.
We did one in that category that you chose.
Yeah, because I felt bad for the fact that, like, the person hosting the panel clearly wanted more people to pick that, or the co-host of the panel, I should say.
And then it was immediately an anime that nobody in the room had heard of, and no one touched the category the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a few, like Animate My Heart. It Takes Two was one. That was for ones that have multiple dialogue, reading back and forth.
Yep.
There was one that was like classics, like Classics Baby, I think is what that one was called.
Yeah.
There was one that was fantasy.
And the basic principle was, you picked a number, they read out the quotation, and then it was just, I think theoretically we were meant to be raising our hands, but everybody pretty soon went to the shout it out first method.
Yeah, they had candy to give everyone else if you got correct answers. They should have just gave you candy if you were just in the room, which was awesome.
Yep. Yeah, I've still got quite a lot of that.
Yeah, there was a lot of candy given out. They also had like other snack options for people who wanted them, like fruit snacks and crackers for people who might be allergic, which was really cool.
Yep.
So yeah, it was pretty well done for I think what it was. A little bit chaotic energy just because everyone was kind of shouting out answers, but they had different levels of difficulty, which was fun. I could answer some of them, and I'm not somebody who consumes like a lot of media. And there was you and I think one other person in the room who clearly make film and TV and media consumption kind of a very big part of your understanding of the world.
Yep.
Is that a polite way of putting it?
You mean are massive nerds?
Yeah, well, like, yes, but a specific type of nerd. I am also a nerd. I'm just not that type of nerd.
That's fair. But yeah, I would agree that he and I were. We walked away with a lot more candy than everybody else, but like everybody in the room walked away with some stuff.
No one seemed to mind.
Yeah. And again, it was fun. It
was. And again, they clearly put a lot of effort into doing that. And I thought they also did a really good job because they picked quotes that for the most part people could get. There were only like one or two that absolutely nobody knew. There were probably about 10 or 20% that everyone knew, which was great. And then there were like a bunch that only one or two people knew. So, which is, I think, the correct way to do trivia.
Yeah, you want that balance. Again, you and I have done a lot of trivia, and our general comment is you want it so that anybody playing or any team playing can get at least half the questions.
Yeah.
Because any less than that, and it's just not fun.
Mm-hmm.
But you also want it to be hard enough that only like the absolute top teams are going to be getting 100%.
Also, this was hosted by the cosplayers. They really had the cosplayers doing a lot of work hosting panels at this con, which
they did.
I hope that they agreed to do like willingly and for fun. They seem to be enjoying it though. And they did put the quiz together themselves, which was awesome. And the cosplayer who I think put together the most of the panel, the other one was kind of more assisting, but
Yeah.
still was obviously there and doing a great job with it.
Oh, yeah.
But she had her parents in the back of the room, which was just great. So her parents were just like hanging out, and at one point she was just like, "Yeah, what movie was it? I think it was RoboCop or something
It was
like."
RoboCop.
And she was just like, "Yeah, my dad showed me this, and me and my siblings when we were too young to see it, and he got in trouble because my mom came home and they're just in the back laughing."
Yeah, apparently, the point at which her mother got home was the scene in which Alex Murphy's getting all of his limbs shot off.
Yep.
Which, yeah, I get why she might be concerned about that.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize this person wasn't a child. She was a full-grown adult. Her parents were just hanging out with her at a con, which is just awesome.
Yep.
And I apologize for not knowing the cosplayers' names either. Again, they are on the ConCoction website if you want to look them up.
Yeah.
I think one's called Mog Shell, but I do kind of like just not trust myself to pronounce the names correctly, and I don't want to get any of their social media wrong. So.
Agreed. So yeah, and then the last thing we did that day was we stayed for the Doctor Who's Line Is It Anyway panel, which was run by a local comedy group.
Yeah, they're called the Greenies.
Yep. And that was fine. So we've been to a lot of Who's Line style panels at various cons, and there are two ways to do one of those panels. One of which is the way that it was done here, which is you have a comedy group of 4 or 5 people who are basically just doing Who's Line. They will they'll take the audience suggestions, but ultimately they are the ones doing the various games. So in this case, they start off like World's Worst, and the suggestion for the audience was World's Worst McDonald's worker.
Yeah.
And again, they were good at it.
Yeah, I think the main stick was they did have like a full like Dalek just on the stage.
They had a
that was
prop Dalek.
Like life size or as big as a person Dalek. So
yeah, that's as big as a Dalek is supposed to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am saying Dalek this time, not Dalek.
Ugh.
Dalek.
Oh no.
Dalek.
Please, British people in the audience, shame her for that comment.
I like how you think that anyone is going to listen to this, particularly somebody from Britain who would be nowhere near this con.
There's other British people in Ohio. We keep bumping into them randomly.
But
not
anyway, at this con.
Not at this con.
So I think they did an okay job with it. They were pretty funny for that particular group. We've definitely been to ones that are worse than that.
Yeah. But the other way to do a Who's Line panel, and I'm going to be honest, it's the way we vastly prefer, is audience participation version.
Audience participation gets more voices to do stuff. Takes pressure off you as an actor. And generally, I do find that improv games are more fun to play than watch. Like, people just like them and enjoy them. And anyone who wants to just watch an improv game can still do it. Because the audience members can also be funny and, like, go up and do stuff. And that's a little bit more fun and engaging than just watching people do improv.
Which, again, so I think by that point we knew we weren't staying any later than that, because again, 2-hour drive home. We knew we wanted to be up pretty early the next morning in order to get back to the con. So we basically said if it was going to be an audience participation-y one, we'd stay, and if it wasn't, then we'd go. And it wasn't, so we went.
Yep.
And again, that is not a knock on the people doing it. They were good. They were getting good reactions from the audience. It's just not the version of it that we personally prefer.
Yeah, we tend to like a little bit more audience interactivity for fun, but they were doing a great job. They got great suggestions from the audience. They were definitely getting some laughs, so I'm sure the people in the room had a good time.
Exactly.
There were also definitely, this was a con that had a lot of room parties late at night. I saw some being advertised at registration. We've not done room parties yet. I think that's on our goal for Bourbon Steampunk Con, which we're going to next weekend.
Yep. To
try one of those. When you're not staying in the hotel, it's a little bit harder to engage in that part of con culture, but maybe we'll get better at it.
Maybe. We will see. We're not going to get better at it.
No, we're not.
No. So, at that point, hop in the car, drive home through a snowstorm, because we are currently in the time of the year when Ohio flips a coin randomly and decides whether or not it's going to be freezing or boiling. And this weekend it decided on freezing.
Yay.
Yay. So, got home, pet our dog, went to bed.
Yep.
Well, fed our dog, went to bed.
Because we knew the next panel we wanted to be at the next day was at 10, which meant we had to be up at 7 to get ready, spend an hour getting ready, taking our dog out, blah, 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 blue,
Yep.
and getting out the door and driving down.
Yeah. So we didn't really do any particularly costumey stuff on Friday because, again, like, I had to go to work. But you did wear a very nice dress with sort of. How do you describe the roses on that dress?
What did I wear on I've already forgotten what I've worn on Friday. What is that?
Pink rose dress. The Mila one? Is it Mila?
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, it's like a bunch of rosettes on it. Very corseted back, very full and very fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a costume. I did wear like a orangish wig with it just because I like to put on wigs. It means I don't have to do my hair, which is great.
Yep.
So I did wear that. Got some compliments on it. But it wasn't really a costume. We decided Saturday was going to be our costumey day because the costume I wanted to wear.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it like is a full hoop that weighs 40 pounds. That's made of basically all lawn decorations that we put a bunch of rhinestones on, individually placed, to basically make a bunch of giant candy lollipops all over the skirt that like sparkle and shine. It's huge, it's massive, and I like to know how I can get around a con space in it before I put it on.
Yeah.
It's currently in the back of our car because I cannot wear it in the car.
Nope. Again, getting you sat down in a chair when you're wearing that is a two-person job.
Yep.
And my costume to go with that is a sort of steampunky Willy Wonka look, which is usually a hit. People tend to like it. It's one of the few costumes where where young kids occasionally notice me first.
Yeah.
Because young kids tend to be able to identify it as Wonka quite easily.
Well, sometimes they do occasionally run up to like the lollipops on the candy skirt and just grab them because they're
so
shiny, which again I'm fine with. They're pretty indestructible.
Yeah, they're pretty sturdy. But yeah, so that was the costume for today, which again, a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. It really only has about an 8-hour shelf life because again, it is 40 pounds of weight just around my midsection. You have to tie a belt very tightly around my waist for my body to be able to carry it. And it does kind of dig into my skin a little bit. So you got to suffer for art. And I definitely suffered for art today.
Yep. But yeah, so got up, got ready, got on the road. And again, 2-hour drive, pretty straightforward. No real issues there.
We had to put on the costume pretty much at the con, which we typically just do in the hallway because I have a corset top that I wear and I just kind of roll it up to show my waist, and then he puts this candy skirt around my waist and then pulls a very tight belt over it, so you're not really like seeing anything. I'm wearing shorts underneath, obviously, so my body's covered. You're only really seeing like a small section of my midsection that's bare, that would be acceptable generally.
Yep. Yeah, like I've seen cosplayers walking around all day wearing fewer clothes than you are temporarily wearing while we're getting you into the costume. So, that's not an issue. But, so we made it to that 10 o'clock panel, which was on disability in writing.
Yeah, it was on disability in writing. It kind of turned into more just a general panel to talk about disabilities, which is awesome.
Yep.
10 o'clock panel, so pretty small audience. I think it was us and maybe 3 other people.
No, there was a few more than that. It was probably about half a dozen other people. But it overran its time a little bit by about 20 minutes. And I think a few people had to sort of leave to go to a different panel.
Which is fine.
Yeah, whereas we were quite happy hanging around and listening to the end of it.
As a disabled person, it's really nice to have kind of a space where this person was, I think, about 15-ish years older than me. Maybe a little bit older than that, I don't really know, is talking about their life as a disabled person, just because, particularly with disability, and I'm sure it's this way with the other minority statuses, it's kind of hard to like find that community. A lot of disabilities are invisible, and even with disabilities that are visible, you don't just want to like go up to a person in a wheelchair and be like, tell me about your experience as a disabled person. It's not something you can really do. So it's really nice to have kind of a space where I could like hear from somebody who has gone through struggles with disabilities that I like have upcoming and am worried about, like, you know, raising a family, the experience of childbirth, advocating in really high tense situations, managing a career. All of that was stuff that was really just kind of nice to hear about a disabled person's perspective from.
And yeah, again, I am not a person with a disability. I am extremely privileged because again, I am aggressively white and I have this voice.
And you're male identifying.
Yep.
And tall.
Yep. And
you pretty much have all the you came from a fairly well-off family.
Yeah, I'm boringly straight.
Yeah, I question how you're not like a horrible person, honestly, because you have all these good things. Like, it seems like because you have everything going for you, it'd be very easy for you to not understand the struggles of people who don't.
Here's the thing. She doesn't like it when I say this, but I fundamentally blame Star Trek for the fact I'm as good a person as I am.
Fiction teaches you a lot.
It does.
Well, we got to talk about all that stuff in the panel, and there were some allies in the panel, and I talked a little bit about how you could like be an effective ally for me and how I could manage my disability, and like it was really just kind of nice to have that space. And I do think cons are a really great place to like have that space for people a lot of the time. And I think panels like that, even if they're not like the most well attended panel, can be really important for people who have either a minority status or a condition or just something else they can kind of have a space to talk about. Because we've seen them, I think, at other panels for other things. We've gone to a couple panels that deal with mental health at cons a few times.
We've also done at least one or two panels in the past that are about race and fiction. And again, it usually comes down to something simple as if you're writing about race, if you're writing about disability, for the love of God, talk to somebody who is that race or has that disability.
And also just do baseline research, like go into details, like watch videos, stuff like that, and use the resources that they give you. But also it's really good for those spaces to exist for people who, again, are part of those groups, to have the space to kind of talk about those things and how important that is. So. And I will say I was definitely in a mood today because you're normally the crier in our relationship by a lot.
A lot.
Like, I almost cried in that panel twice, and I also cried later that day. It was very interesting for me. It might just be something in the air today. And the person also like took a lot of interest in like our relationship because I asked a question. It was very, very sweet. So
it was.
And we didn't have anything planned afterwards, so I didn't mind her like running over for a bit.
Yeah, because there was a panel at 11 that we like was on the heading of we'll probably go to this to kill time. I can't remember what one was.
What was the one on like computing before computers?
Maybe.
Because there were only two panels on. That was one. I'm sure that panel was great, by the way. We were not in it though. So
So again, we basically just had half an hour to kill, which is basically the point at which I ran out to the food truck.
Yep.
And again, the food was good.
Mm-hmm.
Took slightly longer than I planned on to get it, which means that I had to eat it during the next panel.
No one minded though.
Nobody minded.
And yeah, while you were doing that, I was initially like sat down at a table, but because it was taking a bit longer to get the food, and I knew that we were going to be in that smaller board room that I mentioned earlier that only had like 12 seats, I went to like basically go wait outside it just because I knew we were going to need 2 chairs. Because with the candy skirt, I can't really like stand for long periods of time, and I wanted to make sure we had like decent seats and stuff like that. So
because the next panel was one that I was very much looking forward to, because it was a panel on Star Trek Prodigy,
which is one of his favorite shows.
I really like Star Trek Prodigy. If you haven't watched it, go watch it.
I think you've seen all of the Star Treks.
I'm not. I haven't seen the last 2 seasons of Discovery yet. I'm going to at some point when I can work up the energy. Because Discovery is a incredibly frustrating show in that it has so much going for it that it bothers me that it's not better than it is.
So yeah, I was waiting outside the panel room. I can't speak to that at all, so I'm just going to go back to talking about the con.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sorry, I swallowed my gum a little bit. Unedited, it's fine. So, one thing that I did notice about this con, and we kind of ran up against it with the last panel too, and I'm glad it ran over. I really like talking to that person. But I generally do like it when cons tell panelists to like end 10 minutes before so you can have a bit of transition in between panels. A lot of the panels we went to today didn't kind of have that buffer time, so people were like leaving the room at 11 and then also entering the room at 11. It didn't really give you a lot of setup or tear down time.
Yeah, which again, for this con wasn't too much of an issue, but it can be depending on what exactly is being done and a bunch of other factors.
Yeah. And this kind of small venue, so it didn't really take more than a minute to get between the rooms, especially because they were all in the same building, so that was good. But if you had a disability, it could take you a bit longer, and also it might take some panelists some more time to get set up.
Yeah. So this particular panel was basically just a discussion panel on Star Trek Prodigy. It was, we've had 2 seasons of this show. It's really good. Let's talk about why it's good, what we'd love to see from a 3rd season if it gets renewed. Please, for the love of God, renew it. And honestly, it was just like, it was nice to talk to a bunch of other nerds about Star Trek. Because I don't get to do that nearly often enough.
It was actually quite fun to hear you guys talk about Star Trek in just like that minute, detailed way that only Star Trek fans can a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really kind of heartwarming to see. I really do love people talking about what they're passionate about. So even though I understood pretty much nothing that was going on, because I've only seen a few episodes of Star Trek like sporadically and none of Prodigy. That was the name of the show, right?
Yes, that was Prodigy is the name of the show.
Yeah. I didn't really have a lot to like say about it, but I enjoyed the discussion and I enjoyed people talking about stuff that they were passionate about. So it was cute. Pretty well led. I thought it was good that the person like had some questions to ask everyone, so that it wasn't just a complete free for all. And everyone did a pretty good job of like being respectful and giving everyone a chance to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. And again, it started off in that boardroom. I think they decided to swap. Because, after we'd been in that boardroom for like 10 minutes, and when I was halfway through my food.
Yep. Yep. It was nice because the boardroom, again, has a table, so you could just eat your food on a table like normal. But about 10 minutes in, the panel was more well attended than I think people were expecting. But as far as I could tell, no one on the panel like had a disability that wasn't being accommodated, and everyone else was just kind of standing at the back of the room. Or there were a couple of people, because there were some countertops at the back of the room, were just standing or sitting on the countertops as opposed to sitting there, which is fine. They weren't bothering anyone.
Yeah.
But then somebody came into the room about 10 minutes in and is just like, I'm really sorry to do this to you guys, but this panel was like more crowded than we expected, so we're switching this with the panel that was in the AB ballroom.
CD ballroom.
CD ballroom, sorry.
But so we all trooped over to the other room.
Which did like cost about 5 minutes of time, and everyone was kind of comfortable already, but
But again, I get why they did it, and I don't necessarily think it was the wrong decision.
No, again, something we have had a problem with at cons in the past is they kind of just ignore fire codes a lot of the time, like a lot of the time, and it's kind of concerning a little bit because you should not be ignoring fire codes because that can be a disaster really quickly, and we probably were over that 20% or 20 person.
I don't think we were. We were definitely close to it, but I don't think we were over it.
I did not count the people,
Neither
so I do not know.
Because again, there was probably about a dozen chairs around that table and maybe 4 or 5 people standing.
We were definitely pushing it at least, and you didn't want to like kick out anyone who like came into the room late. So
but again, it was a good, enjoyable time. Like I had fun talking to other Star Trek nerds about Star Trek.
Which is awesome, and it's nice that cons can like bring that type of energy. I'm sorry you had to eat your food like more awkwardly.
Yeah, it did mean I was because I got like a sandwich and a side, which was like the cheesy fries. They came in 2 separate containers, which was fine. While I had a table to put them both on, but once we transferred back into the other room, I just had to like put one on the floor while I ate the other.
I mean, also, because we transferred rooms, typically we try to get to rooms early because as a disabled person, and particularly in a giant hoop candy skirt, there's only certain seats I can sit in. But because we transferred rooms, I couldn't like get seat that I needed, so we had to ask somebody to move. They were super accommodating about that, though, which was super
they
nice.
took one look at your skirt and was like, yeah, I think you need this chair more than I do.
Which they were super nice about.
Yeah.
And again, there were lots of other spaces for them to sit in the room, so I don't think they minded much.
Yeah, this room was not crowded.
Yeah.
We were fine. So it wasn't like we were asking them to stand at the back for the rest of the panel or anything. But no, that was a fun little panel. What did we do after that?
We went to the anime recommendations for sci-fi nerds panel,
which was back in the ballroom.
Yeah.
The boardroom. Which again, fun little panel again, very discussion-y based. Insofar as it was basically just one massive anime nerd. Basically saying, okay, what kind of genres do you like? Here's an anime that fills that genre.
Yeah, somebody did fall asleep during that panel.
He did, but again,
they were also friends of the person who was running the panel, so I think it was fine.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, at that 2:00 time spot where I was a little bit spacey, I'll admit.
I was definitely getting tired at that point, because again,
it's just that lull you have in the afternoon. She did do a really good job, or they, I don't know what their pronouns are. They did a really
okay. Based on something one of our colleagues said.
Okay, so yeah, she did a really good job of presenting and was clearly very passionate about anime. And I thought made some really good anime recommendations that were entry level and stuff that people had access to. Because a lot of times when we do anime recommendation panels, they're extremely esoteric stuff. That, and she said it had a lot of anime BS in it, which I don't know exactly what that means, but I think I have kind of an idea of what that means.
I mean, it usually refers to parts of the female anatomy completely ignoring the laws of physics.
Yeah. Which again, I appreciate.
Yep.
That she was kind of honest with stuff like that. I assumed it also just meant plots that are convoluted and involve particular things.
Kind of. Again, anime kind of has a rep sometimes for not handling women well.
Yeah. I mean, they have a lot of tropes, and they just kind of play those same tropes. But again, I don't watch a lot of anime. If you do, that's absolutely great. I'm sure you're probably yelling about all the exceptions to this, and I think she was great at pointing out things that were exceptions to this. So.
Oh yeah, and again, I genuinely suspect her. It says something that she started off by talking about time travel-y stuff, and then she basically said, okay, what's your genre? What's your favorite genre? And I was just I'm a sucker for found family on a starship. And she was great. Here's some examples. And the obvious first one she went to was Cowboy Bebop, which even somebody who doesn't particularly watch much anime, yes, I've heard of Cowboy Bebop. And at some point I will get around to watching it.
Yeah.
And not just the live action show, which I have seen, which I guarantee you, if any anime fans are listening, they just started crying. You're welcome. But
I think it was pitched at the right level too, because again, a lot of intro. I had heard of half the stuff she was talking about, which it's always nice when somebody just describes in more detail stuff you've actually heard of, as opposed to what was the one that had the really weird title? It was it started with a B. Bazooka.
Bodacious Pirates.
Yes, Bodacious Pirates.
Might have been Bodacious Space Pirates.
Yep. Which I'm told that the title's just kind of silly, but the show's actually very good. So.
Yep.
And you got to hear the word bodacious, which
I haven't heard that since I was 2 years old.
I feel who was saying bodacious to you as a 2-year-old?
I mostly meant it went out of fashion in the early 90s.
I wasn't even sure it was fashion. Anyway, you work in bodacious more into conversations.
That's fair. Ow.
We needed, I think, a break after that panel because it was just kind of that, we had been paneling all morning. A lot of these were more for me, the last 2 panels were panels where I wasn't really talking a lot because I couldn't really talk about Prodigy. And I'm a weird type of nerd insofar as I don't really have a type of media I consume. I watch a little sci-fi and I watch a little anime, but for the most part, I don't watch anything at all. I'm kind of weird.
Yep.
So
I'm trying to get you to read more sci-fi because you do really love reading.
I do love reading a lot. I had to stop reading the book you gave me though because I got bored. one chapter in and started a different book. But this book is where a girl turns into a tree, so that kind of is sci-fi.
Okay, you want to talk sci-fi about people turning into trees? I'm going to show you the episode of Doctor Who with the Rani's landmines, where you step on them and they turn you into trees.
So just because they couldn't afford an explosion?
Probably.
Okay. Anywho, so we took a break and mostly just hung out in the board gaming area for a bit and mostly just like drank a soda and just chilled for like an hour.
You know, ate some of the candy that I still had from the previous day's panel. You know, it turns out a bag full of Skittles will kind of pep you up.
Yeah, we both felt a little bit like, I think, more awake after that panel.
Yeah.
And we were also looking at the schedule. We were trying to decide how late to stay, and it turns out like the last thing we wanted to do had been bumped up till earlier in the day, which actually was pretty good news for us because it meant we could go on this weird grocery store goose chase that we just went on. So
it actually worked out really well because we had been looking at the the time slot of like 4 until 6, and we were like, there's kind of nothing on in this, that we want to go to in this time block. We'll be a bit bored. But because the thing that we had wanted to go to at 6 got bumped up to 4, it it worked out pretty nicely. Which, again, sometimes scheduling stuff happens. Sometimes it's really annoying, and sometimes it's super helpful. And you never know.
Yeah. So the next thing we went to was a Starship Troopers panel.
Yep. Which was being run by a chap who is currently employed by the US Navy, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Though based on what he said, I think he's retiring pretty soon.
Yeah.
And you had thoughts.
I did. Again, I'm a professional ethicist. Any professional ethicist is going to know a little bit about both political ethics and military ethics. I don't think it's probably best to share those thoughts with people who are listening to this podcast because it's a bit like talking about things that people might feel pretty passionately about in different directions, kind of like talking about the new Star Wars. And it's just that type of, I think, discussion just isn't constructive. I thought he did a good job presenting his argument. It was clear. It was engaging.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one that I personally agree with, and it's not an interpretation of the text that I agree with. But again, I have not read this book. I did see the Star Troopers movie when I was a kid, but haven't really seen it much since then. So I don't really feel like there's much I can share that I think would be fair to share with an audience.
That's fair. I, on the other hand, have read the book and really like the movie. And I disagreed with about 80% of what he said, while also really enjoying the panel.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can, a panel like that is good to make you think.
Yep.
And it made me think.
Yeah, it definitely made me think about this in context with this, why he would think the way he does, and what that says about how we consume different types of media, particularly those that are related to like war.
Mm-hmm.
Which was interesting because I don't typically read a lot of war novels, so it was nice to kind of hear some person's opinion of it, even if I happen to disagree with a lot of it. So,
and again, this is not a knock on the guy who was doing that panel. It was a very good version of that panel.
Yeah, he clearly thought about his ideas. He had good explanations for his ideas, and even though I disagree with them and could give you reasons why, I think he did a really good job of presenting it.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, in all honesty, I'd kind of like to sit down across a table from him and just talk about this for like 3 hours. And the fact that I want to do that,
mm-hmm.
I think shows that he did do a very good job of presenting his argument.
Yeah, we picked out specific things in the car because we did discuss this a little bit earlier in our drive. And we had a lot of fun, I think, talking about it and discussing it and trying to figure out what he was saying, what we agreed with, and what we didn't.
Yeah.
But we're probably not going to get into that here just because I don't think we could fairly represent his argument, which he gave over an hour in like a 5-minute spiel. And I also just don't think it's like a conversation that needs to be had for a podcast that's reviewing cons. So.
Yeah, I would agree. All I would say is if you have the opportunity to hear this panel for yourself, go hear it.
Yeah.
I think it was a panel that I would definitely say is worth listening to, even if you disagree with his analysis. So after that was the last panel that we went to, which, as I say, was originally scheduled for 6 and got bumped up to 4. Mm-hmm. And this was a show tunes sing-along panel. And talk about a tonal shift.
Yep. So they didn't move it up, so I was worried it wasn't going to be very well attended. We had a couple pretty passionate people in the audience.
Who really, I think, helped make it.
Yep.
And again, classic, sing-along panel, which was basically, they played a few things, then asked if the audience had any suggestions or recommendations.
And they did allow for karaoke-style performances where you could suggest something and come up to a mic and sing it. And the audience would obviously sing along with you, except for your song, because no one else knew what it was.
I am very disappointed that nobody at this science fiction convention knew Jeff Wayne's musical adaptation of The War of the Worlds, which, if you haven't read it, if you haven't listened to it, it's all on YouTube. Go listen to it, because it's phenomenal. It's also weirdly the most accurate adaptation of the book, despite the fact that everybody's singing. It's great. She's giving me a look, guys.
It was definitely an experience. I had no idea what to expect with that at all, but you enjoyed it, which is the thing that's mattered most, and somebody drew you singing, which was also interesting.
Yeah, that was a really good sketch.
Yeah, there's just this very nice person in the audience who was just sketching him, and keep in mind he's dressed as Wonka singing this song, which was very fun. So,
for anybody who has heard Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, I performed Thunderchild.
No one has heard of that.
Philistines.
Tell us in the comments that don't exist, because this is a podcast if you've heard of that, okay?
So, anywho, but other than that, collection of various show tunes, things from The Greatest Showman, which I've not seen The Greatest Showman. I kind of don't want to, not because I don't think it's, not that I think it'll be bad. It's
okay, we're just veering into politics again, honey.
Yeah, that's fair.
I've heard the songs from The Greatest Showman. I've not seen it, so they're okay to sing along with. And they did take audience suggestions, which again I liked. I sung Candyman because I was wearing the candy skirt.
Yeah.
Which I was happy about. So for the first time a little bit earlier this year, I tried karaoke at cons. I've never done karaoke before in my life. I can't really sing. And I've always kind of been hesitant to even do karaoke because I assumed that it would just be like mostly people who actually knew how to sing showing off, and then a few people just kind of clapping at them. But at cons, the atmosphere is just so encouraging that I felt ready to do it. So, and Candyman is thankfully a song that's less than 2 minutes long, so it was pretty easy for me to kind of sing along with. So I had fun doing that. And it was a song that everyone knew and had fun singing, so.
Oh, yeah. And again, it was a fun, silly, light-hearted panel that, a few people got super into.
Yeah, there were definitely a couple people in that panel room that were doing musical theater. I think, actually in the local community. So the first song they sang was just a song from their theater production that they were about to do in a couple weeks, which was awesome, honestly.
Yeah.
And then the last song was Defying Gravity, which...
Again, as a way to sign off the panel, that was a good way to do it.
Well, it's like everyone knew the words. We were actually harmonizing at a couple points. And we were definitely not the strongest singers in the group, but I think we were keeping our voices at the same pitch, which for somebody who does not know how to sing, I think is a pretty good benchmark to hit.
Yep.
And that was also the third time when I cried that day for some reason, and I don't know why. So, yay.
Because again, I have musical training, but not vocal musical training.
Mm-hmm.
I can play the violin, I can't sing worth damn. Or I can. There are certain specific songs I can sing quite well, but
I like it how you haven't complimented my singing pretty much at all. There were moments there where you could have been like, "No, honey, you sounded great," but you didn't even do that once.
I love you.
I love you. You're still not doing it now, even though I'm giving you a window open. Thanks.
I know. I'm proud of you.
That's still okay. Notice that. That is still not complimenting my singing at all. That's just saying I was brave to get up there because I can't sing. Thanks, honey.
For the record, I did that joke on purpose. But no, you did great.
Thank you. But still, it's fine. I'm not the strongest singer, and it's okay for you not to lie to me about that fact, okay?
That. But again, you got up there, you did it.
I did.
And again, I am proud of you for that.
Thank you.
I, on the other hand, clearly have some mild humiliation fetish, given the things I have sung at cons.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. But yeah. So again, fun panel, good way to sign off at the end of the day, and there is stuff. There was stuff later, There is, I think, technically stuff still going on. We're currently at 9:30, but nothing that massively appealed to us. And as I say, we needed to get on the road. Well, I say on the road home, but we decided we wanted to go to a grocery store that's
Yay!
3 hours from home.
For some reason.
Yeah. If you listen to any more of this podcast, you'll soon come to learn that we're a little bit crazy.
Mostly me.
Okay, it's mostly her, but I'm an enabler.
We did. So a photographer came by earlier. It's pretty common to have photographers at cons, and if you're dressed up, they will typically take your picture. Mm-hmm. This one wanted to do a photo shoot, which was a little bit unusual. But we said yes because they were not asking us to go back to their hotel room.
Yep.
So
they were not asking anything creepy. They were just like, "Hey, I think you guys look cool. Would you be interested in a photo shoot?" I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah, sure. Why not? It was free, and again, if people are going to take your photos for free, photos at cons are always a compliment. So,
yep.
So he actually we scheduled a time, we were both free to do this. So this was just we decided to do it since the panel got moved up at 5, and he was just waiting for us.
Yep.
Not creepily, outside of the panel room at around 5.
Yep.
And then he hit scouted locations for stuff he wanted us to do, which was super sweet.
Yeah.
So first he wanted us to take pictures outside, which
was less sweet, kind of nippy, but again,
I suffer for my art.
Yeah, I at least had a coat on.
Yeah, I did not.
My outfit does include a
sort of. He did ask if I was okay with it first, and I'm like, okay, if we do it with 5 minutes, I think I can manage it. We were standing on ice; that was a bit risky, but the photos turned out pretty cute. And he did pose us, which I like, because a lot of times photographers cons will just kind of have us do whatever. He told us what to do, which was very nice. So
yeah. Having that guidance is some people really like it, some people can't stand it. We tend to like it.
Yeah, we do. We're not very photogenic naturally. So.
Yeah, we're both people who kind of tense up when we know our photos being taken, which means the photos look all unnatural. Again, we've taken good photos in the past, but they usually again, it says something that my favorite photo of us is from our wedding day when, obviously we were a little distracted with other stuff, so we didn't necessarily notice the photo was being taken.
Yeah, that was a good photo, though.
Yeah, it was.
And then we went inside to take pictures. I like that part.
Yeah, that was warmer.
Yeah. We're still kind of in the entryway of the hotel, so it was a big call, but there were 2 chairs there, which was interesting because I normally don't take photos sitting down, but I think he found ways to maneuver us to make it work.
Yep.
I really like that part because, again, I was Willy Wonka in a candy factory. He found candy for us to throw in the air, and we didn't even have to clean up the candy. He said he would clean up the candy. That part was awesome.
Yep. But yeah, it was a lovely interaction. It was fun. It was cute. I've now followed him on Instagram, so I can message him and say, "Hey, here's my email," and send us the photos, all of that jazz. So yeah, that was a really kind of sweet way to sign off the day.
Yeah, it was really sweet and nice to have him do that interaction with us generally. And yeah, I do appreciate that cons do have just amateur photographers that go around and do this for free. At some cons you can pay for a professional photo shoot, but it's always somebody just kind of offers it to you for free. Super sweet. So those were all the things we did at the con. You want to talk about some of the stuff we didn't do at the con that they also had on offer for anyone who's interested?
Sure. So this con definitely had a big Pathfinder Society presence. They were kind of running stuff all weekend, which if you're not familiar with the Pathfinder Starfinder Society, it's basically just a group that's, I think, officially endorsed by Paizo, who are the people who make Starfinder and Pathfinder. They will run specific modules. You can do sessions with them, and keep track of characters growing and changing and doing all of that good tabletop RPG stuff. And they also give out free bonus bits and bobs, which is kind of cool. And they do come to a lot of cons and do a lot of those kind of events because it's it's a good way to get people into those systems. And again, if that's what you want to do, fantastic. Now, we've done Pathfinder Society games. I think I've only done one of those.
Yeah, I think we did one at Con on the Cob, which is again affiliated, I think, vaguely with this ConCoction. Main thing is generally we tend to like to do, I think, those types of games at board game cons because board game cons you're there to play board games.
Yep.
Whereas here, particularly Pathfinder and I think Starfinder, these because most of their adventures tend to be long. You're taking up 4 or 5 hours of the day just doing a campaign, and some of them are a cup of tea. I don't think.
No, again, it's something I will happily do at a board game con
Mhm.
where I've like mentally planned to do board games all weekend. Whereas for a con like this, I wanted to go to panels. I
Mhm.
wanted to have those experiences, and we did, and I very much enjoyed them. But they had that, they had a games library.
Yeah, all of their games I think at this one were interestingly play to win, like pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
Which is play to win is when you basically check out a board game from a board game library. They take your ID, you get the game, and then they give you tickets, and you can win a drawing to win the game if you like the game, which is really cool.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see a board game library that's all play to win, because typically board game libraries might have like a couple play to win games or play to win table, but then they just also have other games that aren't there. But this was just all play to win, which is pretty cool. I'm sure a lot of people probably are walking home with board games today because it was a smaller con. So I'm pretty sure everyone who participated in it probably engaged in play to win or probably won something at least.
Yeah, I would agree.
So that was pretty cool. The vendors hall, they also had an author's room, so we didn't spend a lot of time in either of those two spaces, but they, again, a lot of great authors here that you could support. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the vendors hall had some stuff we typically see at cons, a table of 3D printed stuff, a couple tables that were crochet tables of crocheted animals. They had pottery at this one. This was interesting.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of pottery at cons.
And I think some original art also.
Yep.
So that was pretty cool.
Honestly, I think we would have spent more time in the author's room or the vendor's hall if it wasn't for the fact that those were in the other building.
Yep.
And getting between those two was a little bit fiddly because of your skirt.
Yep.
And just because
it was cold outside.
It was cold outside.
Yeah, we probably would have spent more time in the con suite, which was actually like probably one of the best con suites I've ever seen in terms of just space.
Yep.
Because normally a con suite's like maybe like a break room that you would typically see that's maybe like, I don't know, a couple tables wide. It's not very big. This was like an entire like ballroom area just covered with tables and like food that I think was free. I didn't really check into it, but it seemed like it was.
I didn't look too closely at that either, so I don't know for certain. But like, again, in all honesty, if that had been one big enclosed space, would have been phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
If it was being done during the summer, would have been fine.
Still not for people with disabilities, though, and
yes.
We should note that because we were at a panel specifically where people were complaining a bit about it. I think fairly.
Yeah, the getting between the two spaces, if you had that, those mobility issues, was a pain.
Yeah,
and because it's interesting. When I went to go get my food at lunchtime, I actually walked down that ramp. That's a badly designed ramp. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's very narrow, and if you have any wheelchair that's not like just a standard push wheelchair, which most wheelchairs aren't these days for understandable reasons, you would have a very hard time getting up and down it.
Yeah.
But I do want to emphasize that cons don't always have a lot of choice in what venues they end up at. They have to be at venues that they can afford, and if a smaller con like this, they probably don't have a very large budget, so this might just be the only space that they can't afford.
Yeah.
And I do like that they did have a lot of space for a con of their size, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it a little chaotic in the organization, but in all honesty, we've been to way worse.
We have, and this one I think at least knows that they're pretty chaotic in the organization.
Yeah. Again, it says something that during that snafu with the mix-up of which room was which on the Friday, I literally heard the phrase over the radio, yeah, the con chair's on his way.
Well, it's also interesting because during that snafu, it wasn't just like the person who had the microphone talking or the walkie-talkie talking to them. Like all of us were just talking into the walkie-talkie, explaining the problem collectively, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, it was amusing in its own way.
They also had a cosplay contest at this con.
They did.
We did not stay for that because it was like an hour after we left. We also didn't enter it just because cosplay contests just take up a lot of time. They have a lot of rules. Sometimes they don't really follow the rules. I'm not going to say that this one didn't because I wasn't part of it, so I don't really know. It's an anxiety provoking experience for me, so I tend to only like to do it occasionally. But somebody did ask me if I was entering while you were in the bathroom as we were getting ready to leave, and I said, no, it's not really our thing. And the really nice thing was that person did not pressure me at all. They're just like, oh, cool, not your thing. That's fair.
Yep. Whereas we have been to events before where you've said, no, I'm not doing it, and then they've not very subtly tried to push you into it.
Yeah. One time after I had surgery, that was not a great day.
Yeah.
But this con was very nice about it, and I did see a lot of really cool costumes, so I do think that anyone who watched the cosplay contest probably would have had a lot of fun.
I would agree.
You okay?
Just a bit sleepy. I need my caffeine hit.
Oh, you can't have that till after we're done with the podcast.
Exactly.
So those were, I think, the main things we did not do at the con, as well as most of the things we did do at the con. So I think all that's left is checking the phone to make sure we're still recording.
Actually, I was going to turn the sat nav on.
Okay.
It can multitask.
Uh-huh. Is basically just saying our overall thoughts on the con. Yep. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about before we get to like our quote-unquote con rating is just, so MarCon was a con that was very similar to this, that was a sci-fi con in Columbus, so we liked it because it was closer to us, and they did have a little bit more in terms of panel and program than this one did.
Yeah.
Because again, part of the reason we're not staying for Sunday, unfortunately, for this con is just they don't really have anything on Sunday.
Yeah, there's a couple of panels, but like nothing we desperately want to go to, and nothing that's
worth quite a 2-hour drive.
Yeah.
Because I think there's like a talk back about the con, which I do appreciate that they do, where you can like give them.
Love it when a con has one of those.
Yeah. And there's another author's reading, but those two things in and of themselves are only going to be 2 hours, and we'll be spending 4 hours driving back and forth. So I'm not sure it's really worth spending 4 hours on the road to spend 2 hours at the con.
Yeah. And again, that is not a knock at the con itself.
Mm-hmm.
I fully understand that they probably only have a lot of their guests on Saturday, for example. But this one, most of their events were on the Saturday.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Kind of overwhelmingly so, but that makes it so that if somebody wants to do just one day, they can just do Saturday if they want paneling programming. And I'm so glad we went on the Friday because I had fun.
Yeah, I would agree.
The MarCon con that unfortunately closed its doors, I think, due to lack of funding this year, was a lot like this con, except they had a lot more paneling programming on, and I think we're a little bit more sci-fi focused.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just, I think, one of our favorite cons. Yeah. And I'm sad that they're closing their doors. And although I do really like this con, I am a little bit worried about the fact that cons like this seem to be on the decline a little bit.
Again, I think a lot of it is, as we were talking about earlier, certain cons like appeal to certain age brackets, and the age bracket for this particular type of con seems to be mostly older Gen Xers who often don't have the time or don't have the energy and all of that.
Well, they're not bringing in any new people, I think, is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because anime nerds don't really want to go to these types of cons. A lot of people our age just seem to be really drawn to celebrity-focused cons also, which we don't care as much about. Even though I know there are a lot of sci-fi fans that are in their 20s and 30s.
Again, I think part of it is just they're kind of bad at advertising themselves.
That might be part of it, yeah.
Again, we had no idea what this con even was until Thursday night, basically.
Yeah. And also, we've seen a lot of the same people at this con that we've seen at kind of all the cons that are in the circle that we mentioned, MarCon, Starbase Indie. So a lot of crossover between those cons, which is great, but it also means it's basically just the same group of people over and over again. Everyone knew each other's names also, which I thought was really interesting.
Yep.
Which again is good. I'm glad that they have that community. But it also means that they might not be the best at trying to draw in new people, and I really want these cons to continue to be financially sustainable.
Yeah, because again, I love these kind of cons. I had a tremendous amount of fun talking for an hour with fellow Star Trek nerds about Star Trek Prodigy. And I would love to do that more often. But these kind of cons are significantly rarer than generic grade anime cons, and I think part of it is just I feel like there's less merch. I feel I if we were at an anime con that had the same space, I feel like that vendors hall would have probably had 50% more vendors squeezed into it.
Yeah. I didn't like that they had less vendors because it was easier to move around. And most of the visitor vendors were, I think, mostly artisanal, which I do appreciate. At a lot of bigger anime cons, it's very clear that people just bought a bunch of stuff off like Tabo or Temu and then just are reselling it for markups. Like, that's a decent chunk of a vendor's hall a lot of the time.
Yep. Whereas generally, if we're buying from a vendor's hall at a con, we like to know that we're buying from people who are making their own stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's just a nicer experience overall.
By far.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that it can like sustain itself for at least a few more years. I did enjoy it. And I hope that they can start bringing in more and more new fans. So maybe this podcast can be a way of advertising.
Maybe.
So
yeah, so I think overall, we when we were talking about the rough planning of this podcast, we planned this. This is what happens when we try. Be afraid.
Yeah, the bar is kind of low.
Yeah. But we basically decided that we're not going to give like lettered rankings to cons. But what we are going to do is basically say, would we go back?
Yeah.
Would we go back next year if it's on again? And I think this con, I would say yes, if there isn't anything better on.
Yeah. So again, keep in mind when we give con rankings, like our reasons for not wanting or wanting to attend a con might not be yours. Like Colossal's a really big anime con that's at a water park. It's in Dusky, Ohio, that a lot of people just love. We've gone once and we kind of don't really want to go again. Not because it's a bad con, just because we really like panels and don't really like crowds. It's just not a functional con for us because you basically have to like wait in line for an hour to go play Pictionary at that con because of how crowded the rooms are, and it's just kind of not worth it for us.
Yeah.
And the water park aspect doesn't really appeal to us.
Yeah. Again, but and the other factor sometimes for us on a con is how far away is it?
Yep.
There have been plenty of cons that we've said, that was a good con. It wasn't worth the 3-hour drive in each direction.
Mm-hmm. But if you were local, it'd be a great con for you.
Absolutely. Because again, with a lot of it, it comes down to how much did this cost us? And at any given con, while you've got the price of the con itself, you've also got other factors, like how expensive was the food? How, did we need to get an Airbnb to sleep at overnight, and how expensive was that? And factors that add up. So generally speaking, if it's a con in Columbus, there's a pretty good chance we would go to it.
Yep.
Because Columbus for us is about an hour drive. It's straight up the highway. It's pretty easy.
It's worth noting that we live in the middle of nowhere, so pretty much everywhere is an hour drive for us. Like, there's not going to be a con that's closer than that. That's as close as we can possibly get. So.
Yeah, I typically describe our town as near to nothing, but near enough to everything.
Yeah. So this was a 2-hour drive, so it's a bit more expenditure. Again, I do think it's something where if you happen to live in Aurora, Ohio, you should definitely go. Like, if you're just there on a weekend, I think it'd be great to check out.
Exactly. Even if you just go in for a Saturday ticket. This is the kind of con where a Saturday ticket probably would do you fine in most cases, because most of the stuff was on Saturday. Like, I don't regret the fact that we drove up on Friday and then...
No, I had fun. I liked doing it multiple days just to kind of give ourselves something to do and kind of get more settled in the con space.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think I would come back if there's nothing better on for us to kind of do, just because it is a little bit more of a drive experience.
Yeah.
And it is a bit difficult to plan with this one because, again, is people who like need a schedule to like plan out their con day, having it come out like the night before the con makes it a bit difficult to know in any given year, I think, whether or not it would be the right con for us.
Yep.
Because as panel focused con goers, we kind of need that schedule as quickly as possible to kind of decide if we're going to choose between it and another con. And I think that's the biggest thing is when we're thinking about weekend time and we're deciding between cons, we're probably going to pick the con that has the schedule up first because we know we're going to like what's on that schedule as opposed to kind of rolling the dice to wait for a con that doesn't come out with a schedule till the night before.
Yeah. And again, especially if it's closer.
Yeah. But we did really enjoy the con. It definitely knows what it is.
Yeah. Again,
It's
it does feel like a big friends group getting together for for a shindig.
Yeah.
Which, fair and valid.
But a friends group that's very welcoming of anyone who's new.
Yes. That's kind of the difference. Occasionally you'll go to a con that's very clearly a big friends group that they sell extra tickets, but they kind of don't really want you there. We've been to a couple of those, not naming any specific names or cons, and those are not ones we'd go back to.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, again, it's far enough away that I think I would comfortably go back if there wasn't something closer on that weekend. Fair?
Yeah, that's I think about where I'm at too. It was definitely fun, definitely worth the money, and definitely just kind of a cozy overall con atmosphere. And I will admit, I really do sometimes like smaller cons just because they're less intense. For the most part, the logistics are just kind of easier. At bigger cons, like very big portions of your day are just focused on planning how you're going to get around the con space. And at smaller cons, you don't really have to do that. You don't have to worry about like getting to the next panel room, making sure you have a spot at the next panel room, trying to get through these different lines, trying to navigate a dealer's hall that's huge. There's just less stress involved, and I do really like that.
Yeah, like it's kind of the advantage of small cons.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have that extra leeway.
Yeah.
Like again, at no point was I concerned that we weren't going to be able to get into a panel we wanted to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at some of the cons we've been to, we have had to queue up for an hour beforehand to actually make sure we had a seat.
Yeah.
And again, as
somebody who needs disabled seating in particular, you have to get the panels early at more crowded cons, and it's stressful.
Yep. Again, especially as a lot of cons are actually really bad at handling accessibility issues. Like, generally speaking, people want to be helpful, but because cons are run pretty much exclusively by volunteers, they probably haven't had any formal training in how to deal with accessibility needs.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit willing, body not sure what it's supposed to be doing. Would you say that's fair?
What do you mean?
Insofar as some cons are definitely better at handling disability than others, just because they actually have they've talked to a disabled person and said, okay, what do you need?
Yeah.
As opposed to the ones who just kind of trying to improvise it.
And yeah, I think there's definitely cons that do it better or worse. It's still something for which, because disabilities tend to be pretty unique, and a lot of disabilities aren't stuff you can even physically see, it's hard to accommodate them all or prepare for all circumstances or situations a lot of the time, and I do get that. But it also does mean that if you have a disability like me, sometimes you just basically have to go up to like who's ever in charge of that section of the con for whatever reason and just be like, hey, can you do this? And hope that they say yes. And that's kind of a bit chaotic.
Yep. And again, that kind of advocacy is hard.
Yeah. We didn't really have to do any of this for my particular disability at this con, so that was awesome.
Yeah. And again, they had multiple disabled speakers. They were clearly making an effort to be very forward focused in that regard.
Yeah, they were very inclusive, I think, generally. There were a decent chunk of people of colors, which sometimes they're not at cons. Decent chunk of very much trans people at cons. So yeah, still I think a little bit more male than female in terms of ratio, but not as bad as the one we were at last weekend.
Nowhere near as bad as the one we were at last weekend. And again, I would agree it lent a little more male, but interestingly, not in their guests.
Yes.
I would say they probably had more female speakers.
Yes, more female speakers and a lot of really diverse speakers. So that was pretty awesome.
That was great. I always like to see that.
So yeah, definitely a con that I think we would check out again.
Yeah, I would say so. And again, we'll see what's on their schedule next year. probably about 24 hours before the con starts.
Don't throw shade.
I'm allowed to throw a little shade.
I think they probably do realize they need to get the schedule out sooner, so I think that's fine shade to throw.
Exactly.
So yeah, check out ConCoction. We are the Con Couple.
And that was our first actual episode. So,
Second actual episode.
yeah, I'm not releasing that pilot.
He does not like ones that don't make intros, but now we're ruining the outro, so you can't release this one either.
Yeah, it's fine. You know, ruined outros are funny. Besides, the odds of anybody actually making it this far are pretty low.
Yeah, I've already tapped out.
Yeah. I mean, I would tap out, but I need to finish driving us home.
That's fair.
It's only an hour and a half left. So thank you very much for listening.
We are the Con Couple.
And we will hopefully see you next week for Urban City Steampunk.
Hey, you got the title right.